It has always been interesting to me, even as a boy, to sit and to listen as people who have lived a little longer than I have, or maybe have lived in a place which was new to me, told some of the things that happened. One of the surprises to us, because Myrtle Beach was basically unknown to us in 1949 when we came, was with this very fine cove that we have and a sheltered beach, the fact that it was not possible for an ocean-going vessel to land here. And yet I've discovered recently there was a time when ocean-going vessels did have a port in Horry County. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Mrs. John Marion Vaught Sr., or Ms. Ruth as she's lovingly known by those who know her best, is here with us today. Miss Ruth, we're glad to have you visit with us today, and I'm delighted that you're going to tell us some things about Bucksport and Bucksville and some things that have happened during your lifetime in Horry County. Now, you were born where?
At my grandfather's house, and it's practically halfway between Bucksville and Bucksport.
Now, newcomers to Horry County may not know where Bucksville is. If you and I were going to Bucksville today from Conway, we all know where the county seat is, how would we go to get there?
Well, we'd turn off, I don't know the name of the road, but there's a road that leads directly into Bucksville.
All right, you would go south on Highway 701, I guess.
Yes.
Toward Georgetown.
Yes.
And then turn off on the road that goes to Bucksville. We know about Bucksport these days because a lot of people go to Bucksport to eat. Bucksville is about how far from Bucksport?
About 7 or 8 miles.
About 7 or 8 miles, and it's on the Waccamaw River?
Yes, both faces the river.
All right. And you, having been born at your grandfather's between the two, do you remember as you were growing up as a girl ever seeing any ocean-going vessels come up the Waccamaw River?
They come up as far as Bucksport when I was a child.
Uh-huh. And what did they bring? Did they bring passengers or cargo or what?
I don't think they brought much, but they come to get the cypress shingles.
Uh-huh. Cypress shingles. Where were the shingles made?
Well, the timber was cut in those big swamps around. When I was a child, there was a railroad that went from Bucksport up in back of where we lived, close to Waccamaw Church. And that timber was cut and loaded on those cars. And it was, by the way, it was the trains were fired with partly wood and a little bit of coal.
Uh-huh.
But they cut wood to heat those engines so they'd run.
Uh-huh. And that came from Conway down to Bucksville, or?
No, it come from, the mill was at Bucksport.
Oh, yeah.
So they took the timber to Bucksport, cypress, to make it into shingles.
And these vessels that came carried shingles?
Yes.
All right. How about other timber? Did they carry other timber or lumber out of the area to Charleston or other places?
Well, I just don't know about that. My main remembrance was those stacks of shingles were higher than my head, and we enjoyed playing around and among them.
All right. And how large was the mill?
Well, now, I don't know. It looked like a big place through the eyes of a child.
Right. Now, you were about how old in those days?
Well, I was not old enough to go to school.
Not old enough to go to school, but you played around the shingle piles.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see the world through the eyes of a 5 or 6 year old. It does look a lot bigger than it does to us. Now, how did you grow up and go to school in the Bucksport or Bucksville area, or how long did you live there? I know you don't live in that area now. That's
well,
why
I lived there until I went in nurse's training in Conway Hospital.
That's Conway Hospital.
I lived in the house is now owned by Sammy Dusenberry, where I grew up. He's a teacher in one of the rural schools.
Uh-huh. And so you went to, when you were a young lady, you went to Conway Hospital and entered nurse's training.
Yes.
Is that right? And the hospital was where then? Of course, it's moved, I know, at least a couple of times now.
The hospital was on Elm Street, catty by us across from old man Greer Collins's house.
Uh-huh.
Now, he told me so much about history that I didn't know. every now and then he'd say, "Tell that Thompson gal to come over here and let's talk a while." And he told me so much about his boyhood days, and it just meant so much to me. And I have fond memories of old man B.G. Collins.
Now, are there some things that he told you about his boyhood days that you think would be of interest to us to hear about Conway or about the general area?
Well, this one thing that stuck with me, they went down in the vicinity of where I grew up, around Bucksville in that area, and got turpentine. That was a raw turpentine. They had box faces on the trees, and they dipped that out and took it to Fair Bluff. That was where they had to market it. And he told me about, as a boy, they'd haul that turpentine in, they called them kegs, or small barrels. And he said, you know, we'd go as far as the horses could go with, and we'd stop and cook. We always took sweet potatoes and fresh cracklings in a bucket, and we'd stop and roast potatoes and have the cracklings. That was what we had to eat along the way. And they'd go to Fair Bluff and take that turpentine, and then I don't know whether they took anything back or not. But that was the market for the...
How long did it take them to go to Fair Bluff, or do you remember him saying?
From there they didn't have to cross the river. See, they went around above the river, Waccamaw River. You know, Waccamaw River comes from Lake Waccamaw in North Carolina to Georgetown, and it's the same size. Lake Waccamaw in Winyah Bay is the same size.
So it rises in Waccamaw and empties in Winyah Bay, and both of them are the same.
And they're both the same size.
Well,
so I was told as a child.
Well, that is quite... Back in the days when you lived near the river, were the mail boats running at that time? The boats that carried the... I've heard some folk talking about the boat that carried the mail from Conway down to Georgetown and back.
I don't know about the mail, but the boat went one day and come back the next. One of the most wonderful trips I ever had was to board the Comanche at Bucksport and go down to Georgetown and spend the weekend with my father's aunt. We went down on Saturday and come back Monday. And that was my grandfather's sister.
How long did it take you to go to Georgetown by boat?
Well, we left early in the morning, and it was getting pretty near dark when we got there.
And the same way coming back, I guess.
Yes. And it was just a glorious trip to be able to ride up top and see the landscape on each side of the river and look for gators and whatever might be out in the sun.
All right. As a girl, as you went up and down the river between here and Georgetown, were there still some plantations that were in existence at that time?
Yes, partially. Not as well kept up as they were before, but they still planted rice in those early days. You know, there was big rice fields, and there's still some of them that's canaled, and it's used now mostly for duck shooting and hunting and fishing and all in that area.
On the way south, did you pass by Sandy Island?
We went by Sandy Island, I think.
With waterway and some other canals, I'm not sure what's river and what isn't nowadays. Well, let's go back to Conway. You went to nurse's school at the Conway Hospital. How many patients were cared for at a time in the Conway Hospital in those days?
Well, I think maybe they could have taken care of 20.
Of 20. How many young ladies were in the average nursing class?
There was about 4 in my class.
About 4 in your class. And the schooling and training took, what, 3 years, 4 years?
3 years.
3 years.
Miss Esther Faircloth was the supervisor. And Dr. Burris was the head of the hospital, and his health failed. So the hospital closed there was a period of several years, I don't know exactly how long, that we didn't have a hospital in Conway.
Somewhere along the line, you moved from the Bucksville section over to Nixonville. How did that happen, or when did that happen?
Well, I quit nursing training and married, and we lived in Conway 10 years. We attended the First Baptist Church there.
Who was pastor at First Baptist in those days?
Mr. Gordon.
Mr. Gordon. I knew personally, or know personally, one is still living here part of the time, some of the daughters of Mr. Gordon. Ms. Sarah Bryan.
Yes,
James
is
Bryan.
she still living?
No, she is not still living. Her sister Esther is still living. But Mrs. Sarah Bryan, and of course James, had a great deal to do with the growth of Chapin Company, and thereby with the growth of Myrtle Beach. And I had heard of Mr. Gordon. I did not have the privilege of meeting him because I believe he was gone before I came to Myrtle Beach. But I knew he was pastor, but I did not remember exactly where. So he was at First Baptist Church in Conway.
He was there when I was there. He's who baptized me.
Well,
in the river at Reeves's Ferry.
In the river at Reeves's Ferry, which is right up close to where you now live.
See, I was brought up in the Presbyterian Church. Mr. Lemon was our pastor most of the time.
But you met a young fellow named John Vaught.
Yes.
In Conway or something. You didn't happen to meet him in the hospital when he was sick,
yes,
did you? Is that right?
He went to see an old man that had been struck by a car, and that's where I met him. He just picked a conversation with me. And we were never formally introduced.
Never, but you got to know him pretty well.
Yeah.
Well, it appears that fellows in those days worked very much like fellows do in these days. When they see someone worth pursuing, they begin the pursuit. Now, you and Mr. John were married how many years? I remember him quite a
56.
56 years. And you said after 10 years in Conway, you moved out to Nixonville. That was about when?
That was in 31, January the 20th, 31.
1931. And you he went to work, I guess, went to work as a farmer after working in town?
Well, he worked with timber a good bit for Stille plywood and different, in other words, he estimated timber, and then farmed after the boys got big enough to plow, and we had a hired man for a while, and then the boys all took plowing lessons, and they all grew up on the farm.
You have how many boys?
We had 5. We lost Paul in 54 in a swimming accident.
I remember that.
But we have 4 boys left and 3 daughters.
Now, you would have been just a girl, I'm sure, when World War I happened. Do you have any memories at all of World War I?
Yes, very clearly. I was in high school at the time when all the whistles began to blow when the war was over, and they turned us out from school that day. It was a great day.
Yes, it was a great. That day, we're going to be celebrating that day soon.
Yeah.
Again.
Wednesday.
Now, how about World War II? I'm sure you have some memories of that because I know you had at least 2 sons, perhaps more, who were involved in World War II.
I had 4 that was in service.
That were in service.
Our 3rd son stayed in the Army right at 38 years.
Right, your 3rd son retired as a general, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, he's a 3-star general.
He's a 3-star general and living in Charleston now, I believe.
Snee Farms.
Snee Farms, right out of Charleston. Well, I have known some good things about it.
Tom was a Navy commander until he retired from the Navy, and then he worked for Grumman Aircraft. And he's now living in California, Poway it's called. Right close to San Diego.
So he's still close to the Navy. He's down near San Diego. When you were growing up, or maybe even after you moved to Conway and were in nurses training and became a nurse and met Mr. Vaught, did young people ever come to the beach in those days like they do nowadays? Or was there much to come to?
Well, there was not very much. When I first remember coming to Myrtle Beach, the Ben Dusenberries had a summer cottage. All of them are dead now from Conway. But they had a summer cottage, and my grandfather and grandmother, they were very good friends of the Dusenberries, and they invited them to come down for a weekend and to bring me, because Emmeline, she's just dead this past year, I think, was my age. So we come down for a weekend, and we drove the horse and buggy to up there at back of Bucksville, Peachtree Ferry, they called it. We crossed the river there on a flat, and then come on down to the beach. And that took nearly about a day to do that. But we stayed until Monday and went back, drove the horse and buggy. And there might have been a dozen cottages on the beach then, and one old big store. And then they had one hotel that was kind of big and long with a open porch and rocking chairs all around it. Now, the Sasser boys had a drink stand. It was open air. You could go all around to buy a drink. Coca-Colas were then, I think, 5 cents.
And were there a lot of people here?
Not very many. We knew most anybody we met. I put it that way.
But you came by way of Peachtree Ferry, which was where Peachtree Landing is today, I suppose.
Yes.
And came across on a flat, just a flat boat.
Yeah, a flat. It didn't have any, just a very small something like a 2x4 around it. And every now and then a car, the water would run to the end of the car, and it would dump the car and the water and all in the river. That happened to my granddad's first car they bought. They were bringing it from Georgetown, and they got too far in the flat, and the water run in with it, and it dumped that new car in the river.
Oh my. So it was a risky business crossing on the flat.
It was a new Maxwell.
Oh my. Something that most folk probably haven't heard of, because they haven't made Maxwells in a long, long time.
No, it's been a long time.
Well, what was Conway or Conway Borough like in those days? You've told us a little about the beach, and we've seen some old pictures that show some of that.
Well, Conway, everybody knew everybody then. When I was nurse's training, I knew, I think, every man, woman, and child in Conway. And I could nearly about look at the child and tell who he belonged to. And I don't know what the population of Conway was at that time, but way back there in the 1800s, Bucksville and Bucksport were both, and Eddy Lake was between Bucksport and that ferry. What did they call that ferry? Anyway, there was 2 ferries that you had to cross. You'd cross and then drive 2 miles on that island and then cross the river again there at Port Harrelson. That was the ferry. And that was the way we went to Georgetown by car.
Had the courthouse, of course I know the present courthouse has been renovated and added to again and again. Had the courthouse been built in Conway at the time you were in nurses training?
Part of it was there. It's been added to and remodeled. But the courthouse, as far as I know, has been where it is now.
Now, the City Hall, the present City Hall, which was designed by Robert Mills, I believe, was that there at that time as well?
Yes, it was there ahead of most anything. Used to have an artesian flow of water coming right up in the corner. See, the streets were not paved till the late 20s and 30s. I've seen 5 or 6 cars bogged down right there on the corner of 3rd Avenue and Main Street.
Main Street. I've heard some old-timers say that they used to come into the train in Conway and come right down Main Street. Do you remember when the
Yes, I
train ran on
remember
Main
that
Street?
very well. And the depot was a little bit further down next to the river than that public building there.
Uh-huh. And did the railroad end at the river, or was there a bridge across the river?
Well, there was some, I think it went on to the beach.
It was...
There was one fork of it that went straight on to the beach, as well as I remember. And well, that far back, I don't remember too well about, but the train always went to the beach. A lot of people would gather up Sundays and go to the beach and spend the day. Old Captain Sasser was in charge of the train.
So they would ride. Did they have passenger cars, or was it basically...
Yes, there was two passenger cars always on the train, and then there was some freight that come in too. So that if you had the time, and I guess the money, which would not have been tremendous, you could ride the train to the beach on Sundays. Yes, they got to the place, they'd make a trip, go early. See, the regular freight train didn't run on Sunday, but they'd make a trip to the beach. And you could, I don't know what they charged, I never did go then, because if I got to go to the beach, we'd drive a car. That was, you know, after the turn of the century, around 1920 and like that.
Let me move you back to Nixonville now. We're back in the 1930s. What was at Nixonville at that time?
Well, it was a place, Nixonville is where the river crosses. The road crosses the river there, and there's a bridge there now that was put there in about 45, or it may have been later than that the river was bridged. And we had to cross a ferry, and that was Reeves's Ferry.
Reeves's Ferry, and you crossed and went over into the Pine Grove section?
Yes, in the Pine Grove section.
But the bridge has been there now about 40 years, since 1945.
I don't remember exactly. It was not, you didn't ever know Tom Graham, but it was not very long before Tom Graham died. He was kind of backbone of that church over there.
Right, over at Pine Grove.
Yes. And
well, was there very much traffic along the road that went from Conway through Nixonville, I guess, and Wampee over to, it would have been called Ocean Drive then, we now call it North Myrtle Beach?
Not very much traffic. The mail come from Little River, or up that way, and went to Conway and back. We had daily mail when I moved out there, and that was in 31. And there was not too much traffic, and I know there was very few people that had cars in that section when we moved out there. And there was not too many cars that went, you know, the full length through there.
When you came down the river, and here again I say my knowledge of the river and my knowledge of the waterway get mixed up. When you came down the river on the boat, did you come by Socastee or not?
Yes, right through there.
Right through Socastee. What was Socastee like back at the
It was kind of a crossroads, and they always had a real good school at Socastee. John's father went to school at Socastee. He stayed with an aunt. There was not very, the schools were not very long. Sometimes some of those boys that could find a place where they could help take care of the stock or something could go stay with the family and go to school. When school got out at their place, they'd go somewhere else and go to school. Now, John went to Little River and stayed with Dr. Stone or Sloan, one of them, and he went to school there. so he got in 2 sections of school.
There was a post office in Socastee, or do you remember?
I don't remember.
You don't
I
remember.
imagine there was.
As you think back through the years the Lord has given you, what are some of the most pleasant recollections you have of your life in Horry County?
I guess working's one.
Working's one, being able to work.
Being able to work.
Right.
And having things to work with.
Right.
And raising a family that didn't ever get in jail and in much trouble. And they were always fairly healthy. And of course, our church work, we were always associated. After we moved out, we were associated with our Baptist church, Tilly Swamp.
Right. Now, do you remember how, or do you know how old Tilly Swamp Church is? Of course, it was a well-established church when you moved out there in the 1930s, I think.
Yes, I think it was maybe about 1970, or it was before 1900 that it was established.
I believe I read on the cornerstone that it was established in 1870-something, maybe.
I think
that you recently, not long ago, had your centennial, I believe.
Yes, it hasn't been too long.
So it's been
It was blown down. They had a vicious storm that blowed the church down, and it faced the old road. And after we lived out there a while and they built a new highway, they turned the church around and faced it like it is now.
Well, speaking of the old road, I have wondered, I have been in that beautiful cemetery that is not right by the church, but by what I call behind the church. Did the main road go by there, or was that just selected because of the beauty of the land back there?
It was a small country road, probably. You'd have to stop somewhere along the way to meet another vehicle coming in the opposite direction. It was a very narrow road, but people lived back in there. And there was a mill, a grits mill back in there that was a water mill run by some kind of a wheel that forced the water and turned it. And that's where they went to get their grits made.
Who are some of the people that you remember in those days that you were, in addition to some you've mentioned, when you were growing up and getting your family started and getting established? You mentioned Mr. Greer Collins and how you liked to listen and he liked to talk about old-time things.
Yes. He told me an awful lot about things from way back. You see, Mr. Greer was right across from the old hospital. And he called me that Thompson gal.
Now, when you were in training there, was there nurses' quarters at the hospital where you lived, or you had to board out in town somewhere?
No, we had extra rooms. Some rooms that we shared. I think there was one time they had 4 in one room. The room was large. But they never had too many nurses. Mostly part of them were in training. And then we were responsible for keeping everything going, and if anyone was real sick, they'd have a special nurse. Now, Miss Nina Burris, she was a registered nurse when they established that first hospital. That was in the early 1900s.
How many doctors were there when you were in nurses training? You mentioned Dr. Burris. Were there any others?
Well, Dr. Norton and Dr. Wilcox was there for a short while. And Dr. Stalvey, he moved. When I first remember, he had his practice at Bucksport, but he moved to Conway. And but Dr. Burris, most of the patients we had in the hospital were Dr. Burris's patients.
Were you still working at the hospital when they moved to the second location, the one over there on 9th Avenue, close to where 501 now goes by?
No, we'd been married and we had, I reckon, 3 children by that time. There was no hospital in Conway for a long time. It was to go to Florence. I don't know how many years, several, before they got that hospital built. Different people that had some extra money, donated some to help get that hospital started.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't near as large to start with as it was when you saw it.
Well, I remember the last time I saw the building, it had been completely wrapped around with additional building from the time I first saw it in 1949. It was just hard to find the old hospital because it was all wrapped up with a new hospital. As you think of the county in which you've lived all of your life, do you have any hopes or dreams for it as you think about the future and about your children and grandchildren who are growing up in Horry County? Some are not in Horry County, I know, but many of them are.
Well, I tell you, we have a mighty high crime rate in this county now. But most of those people, if you trace it back, are not some of the original old people that's always grew up in the county. A lot of people are those that have moved in. Not all of them now, but a good many.
So one of your hopes would be, and mine as well, I share it with you, is that we would have less of this, well, less of all kinds of crime. But recently the violent crimes have shocked a great many of us at things that have happened round about. All right, do you have any other dreams for your grandchildren?
Well, my prayer is that they'll all be successful and stay respectable.
All right.
And get a fair education.
Speaking of education, we talked about your nurse's training. How about your primary education? Where did you first go to school? Was there a school at Bucksport? Or?
I first went to little old Hebron school. It was a one-room, kind of a big room, had a little wood heater in the center, and there was about 20 students.
How many grades among those 20 students?
Well, you could get, the teachers would say, get as far as you can, and we were not graded. I reckon when I quit school to go in training, I probably had a 9th grade, the equivalent of what would be 9 grades now. And in those years, they graduated in 10th grade in Conway High. I think it was about 23 or 4 when they added the 11th grade.
And then later they added the 12th grade. I remember well.
49 was the first class, first one of our children that had Dick finished in 49, and he was the first one to have the 11 grades.
As you go back from time to time now to Bucksport and Bucksville to visit, how different does it look from the days when you were growing up?
Well, you wouldn't recognize where you are. As a child, there was rows of houses going into Bucksport, just very small houses. They probably had 2 or 3 windows and a fireplace, and I think they had the cooking quarters around the fireplace end and the beds in the other end. Every now and then, children would go, and those houses were for the tenants for the big Bucksport farm. And there was a few good houses down in Bucksport. We lived down in Bucksport. And the Marshes, that's Ms. Jim Lewis is one of them, and Evelyn Snasser the Marshes lived down in Bucksport, and the Marlows, all of them are dead now. And the Penners, you know.
Yes, I know Vernon.
Vernon and
I knew his parents.
Well, his parents and grandparents lived down there, and then Uncle Neil Paul, he married my mother's sister, and they lived there.
So that down on the river is where basically the landowners lived, and back toward the road, which now is the highway, is where the tenants lived in their small houses?
Yes.
And of course those houses are gone now. I believe you were telling me that Bucksport really got its name from Bucksport, Maine, from which the Buck family, many years ago, moved down and established the industry that was there. Well, Miss Ruth, I appreciate this time we've chatted together, and I'm sure others who have a chance to eavesdrop on it will appreciate it too, because it gives us a look at something we didn't know before.
Well, there was a little Baptist church that was called Klondike, and it's still, they have a few members, they still have service there occasionally.
Is that the one they call Grace Chapel now?
Yes.
Or do you know?
I believe they've changed it, but that little, and that building was there when I first could remember.
I've been there for a meeting in the building, and the building is not much bigger than the porch that you and I are sitting on. Well, let me thank you again for being with us. We could go on, except our tape runs out, and I appreciate more than I can say you're sharing with us today.
Well, I know I've left off some of the highlights that you would like to have found out.
Well, that's all right.
But that river is still beautiful. It looks like it did when I was a child in a lot of ways.
Yes, sir. That's one of the things that hasn't changed. Okay, Patty.
Well, now, will we have a chance to see this?
Can he run this, a part of this through, Patty, or do you know? Or Ms. Ruth?
Next 5 days,
they were attacking Jeff in the living room. Who was she talking to in the bedroom? And not only that, how could she talk at all? She had severe stab wounds and her trachea was cut.
Well, there must be some explanation.
Wait, just a minute, let me go on. Page 29. Jeff said he was knocked back on the couch.